Vermont is often pictured as calm and unshaken, a place where safety and community values reign. Yet beneath the beauty of its forests and small towns lies another reality. Men and women without homes, children growing up in shelters, and lives cut short by addiction.
I had a breakdown, alcoholic, I used to do drugs, and it just took a hold of me, and my family didn't want me around because I was getting drunk.
The crisis here is not hidden in massive encampments, but scattered across rural communities, in motels and emergency rooms. It is a crisis of homelessness and addiction intertwined, quietly reshaping the very fabric of a state once considered immune. Vermont shows that homelessness in America is not confined to big cities. It has reached every corner, even here. The contrast between Vermont's natural beauty and its hidden struggles becomes even starker when we look at the numbers. What appears at first to be a rural state, untouched by urban problems, is in fact carrying one of the heaviest burdens in the nation. Vermont consistently ranks among the states with the highest per capita rates of homelessness. On any given night in 2024, more than 3,400 people were without permanent housing. By mid-2025, that number rose to over 4,500 individuals, including children trying to keep up with school and seniors enduring the harsh winters. Although these figures may seem modest compared to California or New York, Vermont's population is under 700,000, making the rate per 10,000 residents alarmingly high. This places the state in the top 5 nationwide. When most Americans picture homelessness, they envision tent encampments in cities like Los Angeles or New York City. Yet, Vermont, its small towns and quiet hillsides, deserves equal attention in the national conversation. The structure of homelessness here tells a different story. Unlike the sprawling encampments of the West Coast, only about 3% of Vermont's homeless population lives entirely outdoors. Most are placed in temporary shelters or motels funded by state vouchers. The reason is simple. Winter in Vermont is not merely uncomfortable, it is deadly. With temperatures plunging far below freezing, and storms capable of cutting off entire towns, the state has little choice but to house people indoors. However, this reliance on short-term fixes exposes a deeper fragility. Motel voucher programs have been cut, reinstated, and altered repeatedly due to legislative battles and court rulings. Policies shift from one season to the next, leaving families uncertain of whether they'll have a roof over their heads tomorrow. A mid-2025 court decision even forced officials to restore 80-day stays that had been wrongly reduced, throwing local agencies and vulnerable residents into disarray. The result is chaos. Parents and elderly Vermonters shuffled in and out of programs, communities scrambling to respond, and citizens asking the same question: who is truly responsible? The demographic reality adds urgency. Homelessness in Vermont does not discriminate by age, but its toll is sharpest on the most vulnerable: children, seniors, and racial minorities. Black Vermonters are more than 5 times as likely to lose housing as their white neighbors, a stark reminder that inequality is not confined to America's biggest cities. If even in Vermont, a state celebrated for its safety and civic pride, race can determine whether someone has a roof over their head, what does that say about the nation as a whole? Vermont's homelessness crisis cannot be understood by focusing on housing alone. At its core, it is also a story of addiction. Over the past decade, the state has been swept up in the national opioid epidemic, with fentanyl and other synthetic opioids leaving a devastating mark on small towns and rural counties. Hospitals and emergency rooms, once focused primarily on routine care, now serve as frontline battlefields. They treat not only frostbite and respiratory illnesses caused by surviving outdoors, but also overdoses, relapses, and the long-term effects of drug dependency. This dual burden, homelessness combined with addiction, has turned Vermont into a striking case study of what happens when two crises collide without adequate preparation. For many without stable housing, substances act as both a shield and a weapon. Alcohol offers brief relief from nights that drop below freezing, while opioids provide momentary escape from the despair of instability.
I didn't use drugs IV at all until I was about 30. Until I was here, basically. I was just smoking everything, but things just got real bad for me, and I decided to start using IV, which was a terrible decision for my addiction, because now I need it. I need to use a needle, and it sucks, it sucks.
But the very tools used to cope deepen vulnerability. Temporary shelters can protect from the cold, but they cannot shield residents from the relentless pull of addiction. Families living in state-funded motels often share hallways with neighbors struggling with substance use, and children raised in these environments are confronted daily with the harsh reality of instability and dependency. The cycle is predictably punishing. Losing a home increases stress and despair, making substance use more likely. Addiction then erodes the ability to maintain employment, pay rent, or secure new housing. Each factor feeds into the next, creating a spiral that becomes increasingly difficult to escape. This is why attempts to address homelessness as a housing issue alone fall short, and why treating addiction without stable housing is equally ineffective. Vermont's experience illustrates, in blunt and unavoidable terms, that separating housing policy from addiction treatment is not only ineffective, but a dangerous illusion. Real solutions require confronting both crises together. The consequences of homelessness and addiction extend far beyond those directly affected. In Vermont, where small populations mean every crisis is magnified, the ripple effects are felt in hospitals, police departments, schools, and even local businesses. Hospitals across the state are overwhelmed with cases related to both homelessness and addiction. Overdose treatments, untreated chronic illnesses, and mental health crises crowd emergency rooms that were never designed to serve as long-term safety nets. Doctors and nurses spent hours reviving patients only for them to return days later, unchanged, because there is no continuity of care outside hospital walls. Meanwhile, other patients, children with routine illnesses, seniors with urgent needs, are forced to wait longer for care. Law enforcement is similarly stretched thin. Police officers respond to calls not only for public intoxication or trespassing, but also for overdoses in public restrooms, vehicles, and shelters. Officers now double as paramedics, administering naloxone in alleyways, parking lots, and on sidewalks. This is not what policing was meant to be. but it has become routine. In practice, Vermont is punishing poverty and addiction rather than addressing the root causes. The economic ripple is undeniable. In Burlington's downtown, shop owners and cafe managers report declining foot traffic as visitors avoid areas where homelessness and drug use intersect visibly. Vermont's tourism-driven economy, which depends on its image of peace and beauty, is being eroded by scenes of desperation outside storefronts. Local businesses, many of them family-owned, bear the cost of a crisis they cannot solve. Most painful of all is the impact on children. In 2025, Vermont counted more than 1,000 minors living without stable housing. Many stay in motels with their parents. Others rotate through shelters. These children attend school tired, anxious, and often hungry, their education undermined before it has a chance to take root. Teachers and schools try to fill the gaps, but education cannot substitute for the stability of a safe home. National research shows that children growing up in these conditions are far more likely to struggle academically and repeat cycles of poverty. Vermont is not only dealing with today's crisis, it is also building tomorrow's. Understanding Vermont's homelessness crisis requires looking beyond the headlines and into the underlying conditions that have made the problem so persistent. While housing is the most visible piece, the story begins with the state's limited economic base. Vermont's wages have remained relatively stagnant, unable to keep pace with the rising costs of everyday life. Even though rents are lower than in major metropolitan areas, they still exceed what many local workers can afford. Construction has lagged for years due to restrictive zoning, high building costs, and community resistance to development, leaving little room for growth. The state's rural geography further magnifies this imbalance, with small towns often lacking the infrastructure or transportation networks necessary to make affordable housing projects viable. The long shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic also plays a significant role. Federal relief programs temporarily mask the scale of homelessness by funding motel stays and emergency housing initiatives. For a brief time, thousands of individuals and families had a roof over their heads, however temporary. But once federal funding disappeared, the underlying fragility of the system was exposed. The motel rooms emptied, not because the need was gone, but because the funding stopped. Stability had been borrowed, not built. The crisis deepens when viewed through the lens of public health. Vermont has been swept up by the opioid epidemic, and mental health services have consistently fallen short of demand. Treatment beds are scarce, wait lists are long, and recovery programs often lack the housing stability that makes treatment effective. Without that foundation, relapse is more common than recovery, and many end up back in shelters or on the brink of losing what little stability they have. Inequity also shapes who is most affected. Black Vermonters, though a small portion of the state's population, are disproportionately represented among the unhoused. People living with disabilities and survivors of domestic violence also face higher risks. These patterns reveal a sobering truth. Homelessness in Vermont is not the result of random misfortune, but the outcome of deeper social structures that consistently leave the most vulnerable without protection. Placing Vermont's experience alongside other states reveals both its similarities and its striking differences. California is often cited as the epicenter of homelessness in America, with more than 180,000 people unhoused on any given night. Encampments stretch under freeways, along sidewalks, and in open lots, forming entire communities in plain sight. Vermont, by contrast, reports only a fraction of that number. However, the comparison is misleading if we look solely at raw totals. When measured against its small population, Vermont ranks among the highest in per capita homelessness. Unlike California, where tens of thousands remain outdoors year-round, Vermont's unhoused population is largely sheltered indoors. This is not a reflection of superior policy design, but a matter of survival. Sub-zero winters in Vermont make tents unfeasible. New York offers another lens for comparison. The state has a strong legal framework guaranteeing shelter, particularly in New York City, where courts have enforced a right to housing for decades. Vermont's approach mirrors this emphasis on providing beds, but the contexts are drastically different. New York concentrates its homeless population in dense urban centers, where services, though strained, are centralized. Vermont's crisis, however, is spread across small towns and rural counties, where geography complicates coordination, transportation becomes costly, and service delivery is less efficient. Hawaii presents yet another contrast. With its warm weather, many people live outdoors year-round, forming visible encampments on beaches and public lands. The driving force in Hawaii is extreme housing costs, inflated by tourism and land scarcity. Vermont does not face the same levels of rent inflation, but the effect is similar. Wages cannot keep up with the cost of shelter, and families slip through the cracks. Taken together, these comparisons challenge the idea of a single narrative of homelessness in America. In California, it's tents. In Hawaii, encampments by the ocean. In New York, crowded urban shelters. In Vermont, it's motels filled with families, children, and individuals battling addiction. The scenery may differ, but the structural failures, lack of affordable housing, underfunded services, and fragile policy frameworks are shared across the nation. The crisis in Vermont does not exist in a vacuum. It sits squarely at the intersection of politics, budgets, and public morality. For lawmakers, the challenge has become a test of both willpower and priorities. On one side are taxpayers demanding accountability, insisting that resources not be wasted on programs they view as temporary fixes. On the other side are community members, faith groups, and advocates who see the human toll of cuts and argue that withholding support is effectively condemning people to die in the cold. Political leaders are caught between these opposing forces, and every decision or failure to decide has consequences measured not in abstractions but in lives. The state's heavy reliance on motel voucher programs encapsulates this tension. For fiscal conservatives, vouchers represent money funneled into short-term solutions with little long-term return. For struggling families, however, they are the only shield against freezing nights and empty streets. This contradiction has already forced the courts to intervene multiple times, ordering extensions when legislative actions fell short. The stop-and-start nature of these rulings and policy changes leaves residents in limbo, undermining confidence in government. Citizens are left wondering not just whether leaders care, but whether they are even capable of governing effectively. What compounds the frustration is the way the political debate is often framed. Legislators present the issue as a set of exclusive choices, build more shelter beds or expand treatment centers, fund emergency responses or invest in long-term housing, balance the budget or protect the vulnerable. In reality, these are not competing paths, but interconnected necessities. A bed without treatment becomes a revolving door. Treatment without stable housing collapses into relapse. Fiscal restraint without compassion results in avoidable deaths. Older voters, who closely follow both state and national politics, view Vermont's struggles as a warning signal. If a rural state of fewer than 700,000 people cannot stabilize a few thousand residents, what does that say about the broader battle against homelessness in America? As national elections approach, Vermont's story forces a broader reckoning. Are we prepared to confront homelessness and addiction as linked crises, or will we continue treating them as separate lines on a budget spreadsheet? While Vermont's crisis is daunting, it is not without remedies. The challenge lies in moving beyond short-term measures and embracing strategies that link immediate relief with long-term reform. In the near term, the priority must be stability. The state cannot face another winter with families uncertain about where they will sleep. A clear, consistent shelter plan, including predictable motel voucher guidelines and adequate capacity, will prevent chaos and save lives. While temporary beds may not solve the structural problem, their absence invites tragedy. In the medium term, Vermont must leverage existing resources. The widespread availability of underused motels and small hotels presents an opportunity for rapid conversion into permanent supportive housing. Other states have demonstrated that such conversions can be completed faster and at lower cost than building new units from scratch. But housing alone is not enough. The expansion of treatment services must occur simultaneously. Rural counties need access to detox beds, counseling programs, and medication-assisted therapy. Housing and treatment must be designed as a unified system, not isolated silos. Long-term solutions require deeper reform. Zoning laws must be modernized to allow for higher density developments, and approval processes must be streamlined to facilitate affordable construction. Targeted subsidies can protect low-income households from displacement, while investments in marginalized communities, particularly racial minorities, individuals with disabilities, and survivors of domestic violence, will address inequities that place these groups at higher risk. Finally, Vermont must resist the urge to criminalize homelessness and addiction. Arresting people for sleeping outdoors or possessing small amounts of drugs drains public funds and perpetuates cycles of instability. Real progress will come not from punishment, but from integration, housing, healthcare, and social support aligned under a single vision of recovery and dignity. Vermont's crisis is not just a local tragedy, but a national warning. It highlights the harsh realities faced by a rural, cold weather state. Limited housing, widespread addiction, and fragile services. But it also reflects broader issues across America. If a state with fewer than 700,000 residents cannot stabilize 4,500 people, what does this say about larger states grappling with far greater numbers? The phrase homeless in America must now encompass not just urban encampments, but also motel rooms, emergency wards, and children growing up in instability. Vermont's situation compels us to ask, will we accept homelessness and addiction as permanent features of our society, Or will we find the political courage to drive meaningful, lasting change?